Hey guys, you ever have an experience where in the moment you feel like there's no point in it and it has no validity, and then you find out later that it was actually pretty valuable? Yeah, I mean, we've all had moments like that, right? Today I want to talk a little bit about a lesson that I learned in terms of empathy and relating to other people. And it really all started when my son was first diagnosed with autism. So I've always been a very empathetic person. It was easy for me to not just relate to other people, but feel with and for other people. And it came very naturally to me. It wasn't something that I necessarily needed to learn, although I've certainly refined it with experience and age and maturity and knowledge. But this lesson that I learned in terms of empathy in regard to my son and his diagnosis with autism was really specific, and it kind of took my understanding of empathy and just relating to other people and totally turned it on its head. It has to do with something which I've come to find out is called the platinum rule. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. I want to talk a little bit about what empathy is, what it's not, how it's different from sympathy. Give you a little recap on this lesson that I learned with you, and in the hopes that in sharing it, you'll find some value in seeing from another person's perspective. So empathy is different from sympathy. Empathy is not just a logical, cognitive understanding of what another person is experiencing. It's an emotional relation to what another person is experiencing. So, with sympathy, you might say, yeah, man, that really sucks that you lost your job. I can totally understand why that would make you angry. Empathy is really more like you're bothered by emotionally emotionally resonating with the experience of the other person. Like, you feel the anger with them, you feel the sadness with them. It's crying when you see somebody else cry. And the biggest difference between empathy and things like empathy or compassion is that empathy is the ability for us to relate to each other in a way that makes us want to help one another. Right? Does that make sense? I mean, it's not just like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. It's like, I need to do something to fix this because I'm emotionally bothered by the fact that it's there. Now, the reason that this is really important is because empathy is an adaptive experience. I mean, without it, we'd be kind of screwed. And it's really important to understand why it's valuable, because otherwise you're not going to want to get better at it. This is an important skill. You want to get better at it. But the only way to get better at something is to have a motivation and a drive for thinking that it's worth it. You have to believe that getting good at empathy is worth it. I mean, and this vague sense of, oh, it just makes your relationships better really isn't good enough. I mean, what the hell does better even mean, right? Like, we need a powerful understanding of why or how being empathetic helps our relationships before we can really decide whether or not it's worth putting in the effort and actually doing it. Now, like everything, empathy has positives and it has negatives, and I'm kind of a middle of the road type of person. I believe in moderation in most things. I find that if you lean too far in either direction, left or right, you're probably going to get pulled off course. And the same is definitely true with empathy. So I want to talk about the good stuff with empathy, the things that you get that are positive with empathy. But I think it's important for us to look at least a couple of perspectives that maybe empathy isn't so helpful, or when it reaches an extreme where it actually becomes damaging. Now, the very first obvious thing that makes empathy worth trying to get good at and certainly understanding is because it builds on and allows us to relate to one another. And the reason that that's important is because it motivates us to help each other. When 10,000 years ago, when we were just starting to figure stuff out as a species, the reason we were able to do the things that we were able to do isn't because we're faster or stronger or have any other adaptive advantage. we're able to do all of the things that we've been able to do because of creativity, imagination, and social relationship. That's it. That's it, period. And this makes so much sense. You don't need somebody to tell you this. Like, it's obvious when you see something happen to another person and you're motivated to help that person in some kind of way, rapport is built like that. And then they're more motivated to help you, and then you're more motivated to help them, and back and forth it goes. And then there's this ripple effect where, if I help you, your partner now feels like they can help me too, because there's a relationship, and community builds this way, family builds this way, neighborhoods build this way. It's this, natural give and take within individuals based on a desire for wanting the other person to be good. And there's a lot of science behind this that I'm not going to talk about in this video or in my blog, which you should go check out. I do talk more about this in my blog. But there's a lot of science and neurobiology that's happening in this that's very fascinating. But at the end of the day, it's really just about empathy helps us feel what the other person is feeling so that we're motivated to help support the other person so that society continues. A really simple, easy example of this, something that's not too complicated, is an experience that I had at work. I was feeling some anxiety, things were going on, there was all of this stress. I didn't really understand what was happening, and I was in a conversation with a colleague of mine, and I was kind of sharing some of this information, and she had a moment of being able to relate to me. Now, the ability to relate comes from empathy, comes from her ability to feel what I'm feeling. So she mirrored back to me what I was expressing. Yeah, I feel that way sometimes too. It was very validating. She shared with me some of the ways that she feels some of that anxiety at work, and so we established an understanding with each other about this shared experience. And that shared experience is what allows us to become closer as two individual people. And so we have this shared experience together, which builds rapport, which is possible and capable because of an experience of empathy between my experience and her experience. Now, obviously, this is a simple example of something like this happening at work. In truth, I don't know my colleague very well outside of work, so there's a limit to how far these things go, depending on the nature of the experiences you share with someone. But the same process holds true with all of your relationships. So your spouse, your children, your parents, your nieces, your colleagues, your neighbors, like it's all the same. It's this empathetic experience which allows us to relate to one another, which then motivates us into compassion and helping behavior, supportive behavior. And it all comes from this ability to empathize with the other person. So regardless of where the relationship is taking place in, or how intimate the relationship is, or how deep the relationship is, it's still the same processes taking place regardless. Now, all of these things are very obvious, logical things. I don't think I've probably said anything that you probably weren't aware of in the first place. And this is all the positive stuff, right? Like these are the healthy outcomes of empathy. But like I said, there are some negative side effects to this. And it really comes in two flavors. It's either not having any or having way too much. And so I want to talk about both. Now, not having any empathy is a really dark, complicated tunnel of all kinds of things that I'm not even going to pretend that I know enough about to talk about. But suffice it to say that what it comes down to is typically people who would be categorized as sociopath or psychopath or even narcissistic would lack empathy. And lacking empathy just means that because you're not able to feel for the other person and experience their emotional response to something, that it leads to some really selfish behavior. And too much selfish behavior stops the ability for society to progress, because we're not able to work together and form relationships. And that's important for us to be able to do. So for those individuals who struggle with making that empathetic connection, there's this inability to feel for the other person, which then has a tendency to lead to progressively more selfish and self-gratifying behavior. sometimes at the expense of the other individual. That's all I'm going to say about it. I am definitely not an expert in that type of psychology, but that's the bare bones. Now, the other type of negative offshoot of empathy is having too much empathy. This is the kind of experience that somebody is feeling so much for the other person that they're literally like frozen with the flood of emotions. It produces kind of a deer in headlights effect, and they can't think, they can't act, they can't do anything. They're just like completely overwhelmed by this emotional response that they're getting from the other person. The other thing is that it can also lead to feeling so deeply connected to another person and sharing those emotions so closely that you have a hard time understanding where you stop and the other person begins. And that's the kind of thing that sort of leads into this, like, what would be called codependent sort of behavior, where in order for you to be okay, everybody else needs to be okay. And that can also lead to some destructive things if you're not able to manage that. So those are the kind of bare bones basics of positives of empathy, some negatives of empathy. And like I said, just like everything else with empathy, it's best to kind of shoot for this middle of the road thing. We want to feel for other people, particularly the people that we're closest to, I think. We want to feel motivated enough that we want to help them. We want to deepen relationship, because that creates more shared experience, which is just more enjoyable and pleasurable. But it also helps our society just be more productive and effective. But you don't want to fall so far off on the other side that you become dependent upon or codependent upon another person's feelings, or be unable to act because of another person's experience. Okay, so what the hell does any of that have to do with this experience that I had with my son 13 years ago with his diagnosis with autism? Okay, so we have this idea of empathy. And then what I've come to find out is something called the platinum rule. Now, most all of us have heard of the golden rule. You know, treat others the way that you want to be treated. And this is hugely widespread. It's a universal thing. Go look it up on Wikipedia. There's a link to the Wikipedia article in my blog. Sign up and go find it. It's amazing. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. But the platinum rule kind of takes the golden rule and it turns it on its head in a really provocative and interesting and profound way. The platinum rule was developed by Dr. Tony Alessandro. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. And as far as I can tell, he is the founder of this rule. Now, the platinum rule says, treat others the way they want to be treated. Not the way you want to be treated, the way they want to be treated. And this is the key thing. The assumption with the golden rule is that the person that you're engaging with wants exactly the same thing that you want. And we all know that that is not the case. We all want vaguely the same things. But how we get those things, and really the stuff that's important to us, varies huge. And this is the key component with my son. After my son's diagnosis, I started to realize how differently he saw the world from me, and the things that were important to him, and how they were important to him, and why they were important to him. And then the things that bothered him that didn't bother me, which were so different. The reason that this is a critical piece is because without my son's diagnosis, I don't know that I ever would have really stopped to consider how profoundly different a personal experience can be through the course of life. And through my son's experience and doing research into autism and other neuro disorders, I realized that there are a lot of folks that experience life very, very different from me, even in just a sensory way. And once you start to realize how varied that can be and how far away one person's experience to something can be to something else, you really start to appreciate the platinum rule and the value that it has for you, because it forces you to not think from your eyes. It forces you to think from the other person's eyes in order for relationship to deepen and for shared experience to happen. Now, some simple examples with this with my son. You know, he is a sensory seeking kid. He has some need physiologically has a need for a lot of sensory input on his body. So he likes, deep pressure. He likes heavy lifting. He likes spinning. All of these things that he does to help him feel a little more centered, a little bit more grounded, to have a better and more focused experience with his day-to-day things. Those are all things that I actually find to be, in some instances a little off-putting. Like, I can't spin in circles. I'll get dizzy and throw up, right? But he actually does better in those environments. And so, and those are just little things. When you throw other folks into it that I know that have special needs, for example, my stepdaughter. My stepdaughter is not necessarily as sensory seeking as my son, and so she kind of avoids wanting to be touched too much. She doesn't like things touching very specific parts of her body because her input on those parts of her body are very different than they would be on mine. Now, these are extreme examples, but I bring them up because without that extreme example for me, I don't know that this rule would have really hit home, because a special needs child doesn't fake it. If I'm doing something for my son that he doesn't like, with another person, they might think, oh, well, they're doing their best and they're trying to show me they care and all of those things. And so they kind of fake it so as to not hurt my feelings, right? It's like getting a Christmas present that you really don't like, but you know that the person's heart was in the right spot, and so you don't say anything about it because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Yeah, that doesn't happen with a lot of children. And my experience is only with children at this point. That doesn't necessarily happen with a person with special needs. Like, if they don't like it, they tell you. Like, there's no faking it. When my stepdaughter has had enough touching, she literally throws you off of her body. When my son is not okay with whatever it is that's going on in his experience, he will say, no, I don't like this. This is not okay. So there's no way to avoid the very real experience of, this is hugely different from how I am perceiving the world. That's when the platinum rule really smacks you in the face and forces you to pay attention, because in order to really be empathetic, you need to be thinking about what the other person values and what the other person thinks about their experience. What do they like? What do they love? How do they feel? And what you start to realize is that as you ask those questions, then you start to actually learn the person a little bit better, because then you start asking questions like, well, why is that important to them? Why does that matter to them? And then once you realize that this isn't applicable just to, the potential individual in your life that's hugely different from you, it's actually really applicable for the people in your life that you're very close to that are pretty much the same. I mean, we all want to feel loved. We all want to feel belonging. We all want to feel validated. We all want to have these shared experiences. But our values are different. How we express ourselves is different. I mean, go read 5 Love Languages if you haven't already. I mean, how we interpret and perceive our world is very different person to person. And so even with my daughter, who's neurotypical, or my mother or my partner, who are all, neurotypical people, they experience the world very differently from me. And their experience comes from a different perspective, because they're different people, because they have different experiences, because they have different values, because they find other things more important. And when I start asking myself questions about, well, why do they like this, and why do we want that, and what does this matter to them, then I actually get kind of a glimpse, a snapshot of a more complete version of who they are. And it allows me to know them at a level that's deeper, because it's not just about they're funny or they're smart or anything like that. I can start making choices and decisions about, wow, is social justice important to you? And that's the reason that this is important to you, is because, equality is important to you, and integrity is important, however it is that this person shows up in your life. And that insight is hugely powerful because you'll express it to them in new and exciting ways. And then that's the empathy that really deepens the relationship. And that is something that I never would have understood without the, amazing experience of my son through his journey in life. Because he's so different, I opened the door into this space where I realized how different everybody could be and how different everybody is. And that took that experience of empathy that I've always had and really refined it and sharpened it, and now it's a precision tool that can be used with the individuals that I'm closest to, that I want to be close to deepen our relationships and support our relationship, which allows me to be a better partner. It allows me to be a better mother. It allows me to be a better friend, a better woman, so that I can come to people not with what I want and how I want it, but what they want and how they want it. And when you are able to come from that and hold both of those things in your mind, that's when real solutions are found. That's when new ways of thinking are found. That's when, those are the experiences that propel society into new ways of being and operating and doing all of the new fun things and thinking about things differently, and paradigms shift, and all of that stuff comes from this place of being able to, for just a brief second, as best we can, have this snapshot of what another person is thinking and feeling, and then being motivated to help them and support them through that experience. There's a lot more that I could say about this topic, and I'm sure I will at another time, but I hope that gave you some insight, some things to think about. Ponder it a little bit. Do some research. It's a fascinating place to be. I love the interaction between people. I think it's hugely fascinating. So, if you find that you're struggling with some of these things, please feel free to reach out. You can DM me or send an email, info@considerjennifer.com. I can help you navigate this and learn to sharpen that skill a little bit. And it is valuable and extremely helpful, not just with romantic relationships, which is always, of course, the first thing everybody thinks about, but with all of your relationships, truly. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Check out my blog. There's exclusive membership information there. You can find it at considerjennifer.com, or you can just follow me on Facebook and Instagram at considerjennifer. So I hope to see you around sometime. Make sure you reach out if you need anything, and don't forget, every day, guys, consider your life and be on purpose. Bye-bye.